Hello everyone, good day to you. This is Dr. Rachita Misra speaking to you, and today in the software engineering course we will be covering the analysis modeling, and specifically we will discuss some of the flow oriented modeling techniques. So the topics that we will cover, we will give an introduction to the analysis modeling. We will understand the objectives, principles, approaches, and what are the different elements and its methodologies. And specifically, we will go into the flow-oriented techniques. So, what we do understand by requirement analysis? We have seen that requirement analysis occurs in the requirement engineering when we are doing the elaboration. That means after the elicitation phase, we come to the elaboration phase, and that time we have to analyze the requirements little more deeper. So requirement analysis is it is we have to specify the software's operational characteristics, indicate the software's interface with other system elements, and establishes constraints that software must meet. So these are the three things that we have to do in the requirement analysis. And it allows the software engineer to elaborate the basic requirements that we have been able to collect, and then we should be able to build models that depict the user scenario, the functional activities, the problem classes, and their relationships, and also the system and class behavior and the flow of data as it is transformed. So we have basically got the basic requirements in the elicitation phase. Now we are going to elaborate it. And when we elaborate it or analyze it, we will be building certain models. What those models will be depicting? They will be depicting user scenarios, functional activities that are carried out in the system, then the classes and their relationships that is associated with the problem domain, and also the behavior of the classes, the flow of data, and how it is transformed. So throughout the analysis modeling, the software engineering primary focus is still on what. We are still trying to analyze what, and we are still not on how. When we come to the design, we will go into how. And one more thing is that the software engineers who are normally engaged with doing this requirement analysis kind of tasks, they are often called as analysts or modeler. This is a role that the software engineer takes when he is doing the requirement analysis. Analysis model and the requirement specification provide the developer and the customer with means to assess the quality of the software after it is built. So the better the analysis model we can expect, the better the software can be built. So what is the objective of the this modeling? So what we have seen is that different aspects of the requirement has to be modeled. So the primary objective of building models during requirement analysis or the elaboration task is to describe what the customer requires in terms of models, establish a basis for the creation of the software design, and devise a set of requirements that can be validated once the software is built. So we have to write the requirements in a different way, in a technical way, so that when the software is built, when we test it or when we review it, we can verify it against the requirements. Because earlier it is written in the business language, so now we are converting it into a slightly different form which can be understood by the business, but it will be easier for us to do the conversion. of the to the design model. So that is why it is considered to be a bridge between the system specification what the user has given and the design model which we have to create for our implementation or the construction. So in between we are trying to create a bridge that is called an analysis model. It bridges the gap between system level description that describes overall functionality and the software design, which is how to build the system, and it provides detailed models, technical specifications for constructing the program modules in after the design. Some analysis models are prepared as part of the requirement engineering and are directly traceable to the software design parts. So these analysis models, which are part of the requirement, but actually sometimes they also move to the software design. Moreover, it is difficult to create clear boundary between the analysis and design modeling. As such, some design may also occur during the analysis. Just as analysis models get refined during the design model, so also some of the design is sometimes done at the analysis modeling stage. So let's see if we can create some principles that we have to follow during the analysis modeling. Analysis methods are related by a set of operational principles. What do they say? The first one says that the information domain of a problem must be represented and understood. So we have to analyze the requirement such that we can represent the information domain. And what we do mean by the information domain, it encompasses the data flow into the system and out of the system, and also what is stored into it. So the way the data is moving into the system and out of the system, and also the way it is being kept inside the system, either in its data stores or in its data structures, that is called as the information domain, and that has to be modeled or represented so that it can be properly understood. The functions that the software performs must be defined. So again we are coming to the function domain. So first one was the information domain, second one is the function domain. And these functions are those business features of business functions which are providing direct benefit to end user to do their work. And these are the features which are visible to the user. So how the user will do the work, that is depicted in the functions or the function domain or the function modeling. The behavior of the software must be represented. Also we have to represent the behavior of the project. So we have represented the information, then we are representing the function, and then we are representing the behavior. And when we say behavior, the behavior that drive its interaction with the external environment, how it behaves in the external environment. That means how does it respond to the input provided by end user, control the data provided by external systems, or monitoring the data. So these are the kind of way the way the system behaves, either to input data or events or any control signal, that is written in the behavioral kind of modeling. So that aspect has to be studied in the analysis modeling. Then key strategy of analysis model is to provide complex problem, to divide the complex problem into sub problems, and until each sub problem is relatively understood. So we have to also do what is known as a partitioning. So when we analyze the user's requirements or the user's problem, we have to make it smaller and smaller, or rather simpler and simpler. From the complex we have to go into the simpler by partitioning it, so that at the end of it, the essence or how the solution will be implemented, that can be properly understood. And the models that depict information, function and behavior must be partitioned in a layer that will uncover it in a layered fashion. That means we will have a top level layer which will be the highest level of abstraction. Then we will have a little detail level and then more detail. So we will go in a layered manner. Not only that we will partition it, the partitions will be represented in a layered manner for information, function and behavioral aspects of the analysis model. The analysis task should move from essential information towards implementation details. Also, there are some rules of thumb given by Arlo and Neustadt. We can just take a look at it. The model should focus on requirements that are visible. That means the business domain. And also, each element of the analysis model should add to an overall understanding, and it should provide insight to the information, function and behavior of the system. Then consideration of the infrastructure and other non-functional models is not to be taken up. It is only to be taken up during the design. So we should not get into such kind of non-functional and infrastructure things. We should only concentrate on analysis of the functional and information and the behavior model. Then minimize the coupling throughout the system. We should try to make, when we partition the system into smaller and simpler units, we have to see that these are more or less independent as much as possible. The interconnection is less. So that is what is known as minimizing the coupling. Ensure that the analysis model provides value to all stakeholders and keep the model as simple as it can be. We should avoid unnecessary diagrams and forms. There are two major approaches to the analysis, the requirement analysis. One is called the structured analysis and the other one is called the object-oriented analysis. The structured analysis is a much earlier method, and the object-oriented analysis has come later, after the object-oriented concepts have come up and object-oriented languages have come up. So in the structured analysis, what we look for is we mainly look for data objects. These are modeled in a way that defines their attributes and relationships. So two things about the data objects. We first identify the data objects, model them in such a way that their attributes and relationships also can be properly depicted. And then we have the processes. So we, from the functions, we try to we depict the functions in terms of data objects and processes. The processes are those units of the software that will be transforming the data objects. And these data objects, after it is transformed, will flow through the system like an information. So the information and the functions are together taken and they are depicted as data and process. So we have two distinct features in the structured analysis. One is to do with data objects and the other one is to do with the processes that are doing the transformation. And their flow. We have to see the flow of the process and the data. And then we have the object-oriented analysis where we focus on the class. And as many of you know, because you are all doing object-oriented programming, you know what a class means. It is a generalization of objects and their relations and their collaborations to satisfy the user's functions. The main difference between this and this is that here data and processes are separated, but here the class hides the data inside it. So we are always considering when we say class, we are also considering the data inside it, and we are also looking for its operations. That is what is the and its relation to each other and collaboration to satisfy the user's function. And we have something known as a unified modeling language, UML, which mostly supports the object-oriented method. It is a standard technique for diagramming many of the models. So what is the mechanics of the structured analysis? because in this class we will also go through the structured analysis methodologies. It uses three types of models. One is the entity relationship diagram, second is the data flow diagram, and third is the state transition diagram. So I'm sure many of you must be already familiar with the entity relationship diagram. Normally we discuss that when we are doing our database course, how to create the entities, how to define the relations, and and it is used also in your database normalization. So we will not be looking into it in this class because that is something which many of us know it. It is nothing new, and we will mostly concentrate on data flow diagram and state transition diagrams. But nevertheless, ERD is a part of the structured analysis method. Then when we go to the analysis, the elements of the analysis, can we classify the analysis models? Then these are all the elements that is available in the analysis models. So many models are available, and these are categorized into four types of elements. There are flow oriented elements, behavioral elements, class based elements, and scenario based elements. And under each one you have this set of diagrams. These are the actual models that we will be building under these categories of analysis elements. So we will be now going to the flow oriented elements, and we will look into some of these models or some of these diagrams. So first we will start with the data flow model. In the data flow model, what is a data flow model? It enables the software engineer to develop models of the information domain and the functional domain at the same time. So that is what I was talking a little while ago. We can combine the information and the function together. So the functions are when we see the function, we see the function as a flow of information or a flow of data, and the processes that transform this data. So in DFD, each function is shown as a processing station, and it either consumes some data as the input and it produces some output data. So this is the transformation station. The processing is nothing but a transformation station. It takes some data and outputs some data. Data flow diagram may be used to diagrammatically represent a system or software at different levels of abstraction. And we have seen that in the principle, we have seen that we have to go into we have to go from higher levels of abstraction to lower levels of abstraction. So in data flow diagram that is followed. Initially we make a very high level, and then we go to the lower and lower level. A DFD is refined into greater level details. The analyst performs an implicit functional decomposition. So this is that partitioning or the decomposition we are doing here. So we do a functional decomposition of the system, and we break it into lower and lower processing stations, processing elements. A DFD refinement results in corresponding refinement of data also as it moves to the processes that represent the application. So when we do the process, when we break the processes into smaller processes, or what you call as the transformation stations, then the data also gets divided and that also gets refined. So we can see some DFT guidelines how to make it. So in the DFT guidelines, you will have a very high level which is called as the 0 level. This is depicted as a full system, the full system as a single bubble. So we will call this when you say single bubble, that means a single round or a single ellipse. So the whole system is written as a single system. Primary input and output should be carefully noted. So all the systems, what is the external input and output, those only will be written, and then it will be refined to the next level by isolating candidate processes and their associated data objects and data stores. So we have to take one single process, its data stores, its data objects. These three things we have to take. When we say data objects, they are both input and output. So these things we have to say, and then we have to refine it, or we have to decompose it into lower level processes, so that we can get the level 1 abstraction, level 2 abstraction, and so on. We will continue until we have reached a very simple process which cannot be refined anymore. So all arrows and bubbles should be labeled with meaningful names, as to do with business language. The name should be in such a way that business people will be able to understand it. It should be meaningful to business people. Bubbles will be numbered, indicating the level. So which level we are, whether we are in the 0 level or first level or second level, the naming convention of the bubbles will contain that. Information flow continuity must be maintained from level to level. So there has to be some kind of a balancing. There will not be anything left out. It has to be continuous. It has to be maintained. The continuity has to be maintained. One bubble at a time should be refined. We should at a single time we should not take two processes and refine it. We should take only one process. When we say bubble, it means a process. The DFD must be balanced between the levels for all inputs and outputs. So if you take the first level DFD and the second level DFD, then we can strike a balance between it for all the inputs and outputs. So at level 0, we call it the fundamental system model or a context model. Why we call it as context model? Because it sets the context in which the system is going to work. Or in other words, what it will show all the external entities that interact with the system, along with the input and output data indicated by incoming and outgoing arrows. So it will create the complete context in which the system sits. It will be a single bubble. It will have all the external entities around it, and the way they are interacting, what is the input data that is coming and what is the output data that is going out. The whole thing will be described in a single bubble, in the 0 level DFD, called as the context model. Level 0 DFD refinement into level 1 DFD with all relevant processes to the system. So when we say relevant, that means all the major processes. So when we go from 0 DFD to level 1 DFD, then we have to break this system into the major processes or the major branches of the functionality of the system. Each process in the level 1 DFD can then be refined into level 2 DFD. So level 2 DFD will actually contain more detail of each of this major process. Refinement of DFD continues until each bubble performs a simple function. At the end of all refinements, the DFD must be checked for balancing the inputs and outputs across the levels. So this is an example. I have taken a very simple problem, that is calculating the root mean square software. So you can write in few sentences what is the problem. The problem is that it should read some numbers that is provided as input, and it will compute the root mean square and give the result. And internally it may do many other processes. So if you see this is like the context diagram. There is only one external entity, the user, and some data items will enter into the system. This is the system, compute RMS. It is at level 0, and the result will have to come out. Now if you go to the level 1, this bubble has to be broken up into the major processes. So we can think of one process called read numbers, then second one validate numbers, third one compute root mean square, and the fourth one is display, because the result has to come out. So whatever is coming out, data items, is going in here, and whatever is coming out here is coming out here. And all these things are internally to the system. Now it is exposed in the level 1 DFD. So with read numbers, the numbers will go here, then they will be validated. If there is an error, then it will display the error, and if it is valid, then it will compute the RMS, and then it will show the RMS. Now if we want, we can break some of these processes into the DFD level 2. So in the DFD level 2, we have taken this calculated sum. So you can see here this 3 compute bubble. This compute bubble has been decomposed. You can make that out from the numbering system. That is why I had said that the numbering has to be in such a way that you can identify the levels in it. So this is 3.1, so there are 3, so this is level 2, and it comes from the third process in the level 1. So calculate squared sum. The valid numbers are going into it as it has gone into the previous process, and the sum squared is coming in. Then it is calculating the mean and the mean square, and then it is calculating the roots. Next you have the control flow. So we have seen a little bit of the data flow, how it can be made, how the data flow is made, and now we will go into the control flow. In the control flow, the application which contains collection of classes that are dependent on an event. So in the data flow, we were looking into the input of the data. In the control flow, it is not data, either it is an event or a signal, that is a control information that is creating some response or some change, behavioral change in the system. In that case, we will need a control flow model. We have to understand how the control changes when there is a input signal or an event or a trigger. So that we have to understand. So this control flow model will be modeling that kind of information. They require the use of control flow modeling. Applications which contain collection of classes that are dependent on the event rather than data will produce control information. So this information is a different type of information. This is a control information. These kind of applications, they require the use of control modeling, control flow modeling. Like in flowcharts, we did for programming, we wrote flowcharts, or for process, to indicate the process we have used flowcharts. Similarly, we will do a control flow modeling for the control information processing. In addition to the data flow modeling. So we have already done the data flow modeling, but if the application also has this kind of nature, that there is some event related activities, then we have to do the control flow modeling. And what is the guidelines for us? List all the processes, then list all the interrupt conditions. So these are conditions in which it might get interrupted, or some trigger may come, or some activity may change. List all the activities that are performed by operator or an actor. List all data conditions. Which are the conditions on which some control will happen? And review all the control items as possible for control flow inputs and outputs. Once this is done, the conditions are known, the interrupts are known, the data condition and the interrupt conditions are known, then we will look into this control items. Then describe the behavior of the system by identifying its states, identify how each state is reached, define the transition between these states. So in control kind of applications, what happens? When the signal comes, all the control items that they change. They are earlier in one state, they change their state. So there is a state transition. So that state transition, the state diagram and the state transitions has to be modeled. That is what is modeled in the control flow. So that is the guideline is telling describe the behavior of a system by identifying its states, identifying how each state is reached through this trigger, and define the transition between the states. Focus on possible omissions, a very common error in specifying control. So whenever we do the control, it's possible that we will omit something. So we have to be very careful about that. This is an example of a control flow model. As you can see, it looks like a flow chart, but the notations are different. We don't have the normal diamond shape and other things, other shapes of the elliptical shapes of the flowchart. This is a simple box type thing. So what we are doing, what we are demonstrating here, we are showing the control flow model of a powering fan, of powering a fan with either a battery or power. So it is starting, it is looking for battery dead. If it is yes, then it comes here. It has to put on the power, so it has to route it through the power, route the TEG power to fan. So the fan has to be put on the power and charge the battery and battery power to auxiliary device. And if the battery is dead, no, that means battery is not dead. Then this producing power, yes, then we have to see whether power is getting produced, then switch from battery to power, and then you come to this, you start charging the battery. And this is, if this is no, that means there is no power, then we have to route it to the battery. But if the battery is dead, we have to definitely come to the power. So when the battery is dead, we are coming to power. If the battery is not dead, it is alive, then we are checking whether power is there or not. If power is there, then we switch from battery to power. But if the power is not there, then we have to go to the battery mode. This is another example. This is the control flow of an ATM. This is followed a slightly different kind of. It has also got some include conditions, and some of the constraints are written here. This is following the UML notation. This is the same notation that is followed in UML. When we study the other diagrams, you will see it. So these square bracket are all constraints, and this is the start, this is the stop. The stop is always like this double, and this is the different states, different action it is doing, and when it happens, there is a include, you can include something. So include authenticate account holder, select operation, select amount. If the amount is not valid, then you have to give a notification or a message. If the amount is valid, then you authorize the withdrawal and show the balance. And this is another, these are all the alternate paths if provided these kind of constraints are happening. So if these conditions happen, then it will go into a alternate path. So the control path is being shown based on the conditions or the type of event that is happening or the condition is happening. Then we come to something known as a control specification. So we have seen the control chart. Now we are talking of control specification. It represents the behavior of the system in two different ways. One is a state diagram, the other is a program activation table. The state diagram again shows the sequential behavior of the system. So there will be different states, and under what condition it will enter to the state, under what condition it will exit, what will be the triggers. So that is known as the state transition. We will discuss state transition in more detail when we come to the behavioral elements of the analysis models. So currently, let us understand that in the control specification, apart from the control chart, we can also use the state diagram, and we can also use something known as the program activation table. Though it describes the behavior of the system, but it has no information about the way the processes work to derive the result. So the internal process we are not talking. We are only talking of the transition, the state and its transition, and under what condition it will transition. This is the state diagram of a home security function, and it has been taken from the Roger Pressman book. The behavior modeling using state diagram is now a part of UML. That is what we will discuss it later. Now we come to the process specification. In the process specification, it include, for each bubble we have to write a mini spec so that it can go into the design and the implementation. And what will be the process specification, how it will look? It will have a textual narration, some of the algorithms that it will use to transform the data. There may be mathematical equations, can be mathematical tables that we use and which we keep as data structures in the implementation level. Then we can have rules, decision tree, decision tables, diagrams, and charts. So whatever we are using, whatever is applicable for a particular process to do the particular transformation it is expected to do, or the manipulation that it is expected to do, that information we have to include in its process specification. Sometimes the program design language description may be included, but normally at the, because now we are doing at the analysis phase, we are doing these modelings at the analysis phase. Normally this PDL will be used during the design phase. Then we come to what is known as data dictionary. So because we have kept we have done the process specification, and we have done the data flow diagram and the control flow and the state chart. So it is always good that we keep a data dictionary. So what is data dictionary? Data dictionary is a catalog or repository of the system elements. What are those system elements? Data flow, data store, process. And when we store these things, and there can be many more things, we have to keep it with their identifying name, the identifier, or some kind of an index and name, that is its title, its description, whatever is its properties or features. So this kind of information, if you keep it in a data dictionary or a repository, then it is very easy for us. So what is the benefits we will get? The major benefit is that it helps to maintain common meaning for system elements in a consistent manner. So when different people will use, they will have the same meaning. Everybody, it will, whatever terminology we have used, whether it is a process or a data store or a data flow, whatever it means, the same thing it will mean every time and to every user. So the consistency is maintained. It can be used as a communication tool and for ensuring uniform understanding, helps in locating errors and omissions because we have write down, document the data dictionary and save it in a, as a repository. Then it can manage large system details easier. It is more helpful. It is more user friendly. Helpful for documenting the system features like properties, attributes, and behavior. So we can use that for the documentation purpose because it's already there in the repository, so we can draw it anytime and document it. And it facilitates analysis of the system in detail to suggest where and what features require modification. So whenever we have some changes we are discussing and some requirement change is coming, if you have the data dictionary as a repository, as a like kind of a database, then you can you can analyze that and you can see what are the relating elements that are the features that have to be modified. So how does the data dictionary look like? It has data description, which will have names, any alias names, length, data length. So because this is only the elementary data, so it will have its attributes like length, values, types, the format, anything that you can understand as the data, because you all might have dealt with similar kind of thing in database design. So when we do the database design also, we look for length, value, type, format, and things like that, and the identifier. And then you have the data structure. So data structure, that means how the data is structured. Here we are not talking of data structure which are arrays, lists, and things like that. Please don't understand this as those kind of data structure. What we are talking is that if we have a data for which we want to keep the information in the repository, it is being used many times in our system, then we have to describe what is the structure in that data. So you can have a sequence relationship, that means set of elements which are always included. Then selection relationship, that means option to select alternate data structures. Iteration relationship, that means there is a repetition of the data elements multiple times. So whenever you have a data element which is occurring multiple times, you can use the iteration relationship. And then there can be an optional relationship. That means that element may exist or may not exist. So under certain circumstances it will exist, and under certain other circumstances it will not exist. It is not that it is always absent. I mean, it is sometimes present and sometimes absent. So that is called as an optional relationship. Then it is just opposite to sequence, where sequence is always included and this is optional. Then come to the data flow. It includes name, description, from, to, processes, data structure of the data flow, because every data flow will have a name, a set of data which is moving. So we have to define the structure of each data flow in this way. And then data stores, these also will require data structure. Apart from that, it will have name, data description. What is the inbound data flow and the outbound data flow? In data flow, we said which is the from process and the to process. That means from which process to which process this data is flowing. In the data store, we are saying inbound data flow and outbound data flow. That means what is coming into the data store and what is going out of the data store. Then the volume and growth. That means how much volume it will be and what rate it will grow. Then what is the access method for that data store and its structure. Then we have processes in the data dictionary, which includes process name, description, inputs and outputs of the data. That means the data flow that coming into the process and the data flow that is going out. Summary of the logic written in a procedural documentation language. So here your PDL is coming, procedural documentation language, or a program documentation language, such as structured English. So we can use the structured English, and the structured English also becomes part of the data dictionary or the repository. These are some of the notations. This is your alias, and this is your concatenation or and this is either or. So these are selection. So you can have multiple elements and multiple values inside a square bracket. So one of it will work. So they are selection relationship. Then you have iteration relationship within curly bracket, which will define repetition of some components of the data. And then you can have the optional, and it can be 0 or it need not be there, or it can be there. So we can see some examples here. The student data. The student data is equivalent. So this is aliasing here, is equivalent to this. So this is its structure. It is one name concatenated with address, concatenated with, see this symbol, landfall or mobile. So this is within the bracket, either or. So either this or this. Then it is again concatenated with course number, course name and course credit. Here all the three are mandatory fields, but here it is either this or that. Similarly, you can take the name field, this field, and it can be further broken down. First name concatenated with middle name, last name. Now you must note here that the middle name is optional. It has got these small brackets. So sometimes some people will have middle name, some people will not have. So we have come to the end of the flow oriented techniques, and we have also seen, we have taken a very good introduction to the analysis model, which are prepared as part of the requirement elaboration or requirement analysis tasks. As a principle, analysis examines three things, that is the information domain, functional domain, and the behavioral domain, the behavioral elements of the system. So these are the three major things that we do analysis, and we prepare different models for it, so that it is easier for the users to validate that the requirement are properly understood, and it is easier for us, the software engineering team, to go for the design and construction. So it acts as a bridge. There are two major approaches we have seen. One is structural analysis, other is object oriented analysis. And also we have seen the elements of the analysis that can be classified as four types. One is flow oriented, second is behavioral oriented, then class based and scenario based. Each one containing more than one techniques or one modeling techniques. Then we discuss the flow oriented elements. Under it we discuss few things, that is, one is the data flow diagram, other is control flow, then we discuss the process specification, and finally we discuss the data dictionary, which is common to both the data flow, control flow, and all the process specification. So coming to the end of the we have come to the end of the lesson today. Thank you all. In the next lesson we will be taking up the other types of modeling. We have said that there are four types, so we will be slowly taking up the class based type of analysis model, the scenario based type of models, and also the behavioral type of model. So in this class we have discussed the flow oriented models. So finally, thank you all.